Listening to Anatoly, this is either a giant scam or this is the next real deal thing.
Solana's vying for number one with Ethereum.
He had actually solved the problem to take what Ethereum had done and make this scalable to the world. The hackathons are that carrot. This is the big opportunity. These are like the biggest events in Web3. Google, Amazon numbers for hackathon. The presentation of a hackathon is more important than the code itself.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Next Billion podcast. And today we're talking to the builders, the entrepreneurs, the people that make things happen, that are building the ecosystems to onboard the next billion people into crypto. And today we have a good friend of mine. We were hanging out in a literal snowstorm like a couple of weeks back. And now look at this guy. He's got surfboards in the background. The sun is shining. It looks great. We've got Chase from the Solana Foundation here. Chase, how you going?
Hey, George. Happy to be here. Yeah, man, it was definitely cool to connect in Istanbul. That was a pretty special event. I think I had reached out to you like 6 or 7 months ago, and I was like, hey, we probably have some things happening in Turkey, so get ready. So I'm glad we got a chance to finally catch up in person.
Yeah, I mean, it came from nothing to something pretty quick. And I remember that message you sent, and we were talking, like that was when Super Team was sort of, I think, investigating or looking to do something in Turkey as well. And it was like, okay, it seems like this place is starting to hot up and there's a lot of developer interest here, so let's make it happen. So yeah, look, that hacker house was great. We can talk about the hacker houses in general, but if you guys out there haven't already, like definitely go to solana.com/events or something, and that's where all of the hacker houses are at. And there's usually going to be one within 1,000 kilometers of you probably. So go and check it out. But thanks for being on the podcast today. Yeah, look, let's get into it. There's a couple of things that we can talk about on the developer side with Solana and building that from nothing to something on an L1, but maybe a little bit about your personal journey so far. So how did Chase get into doing crypto stuff? Or why was it interesting in the first place for you to want to go and do this stuff?
Yeah, for the people that know me on Twitter and see me and think that that's literally my job, like I was actually an engineer for about 12 years, full stack engineer working in a lot of horrible legacy technology. And working in those circles, like I think my first introduction to crypto was hearing probably about the Silk Road around that time was the first time I had heard about it. And I was like super confused, but then I had some coworkers that started to mine Bitcoin and all these different things. And that's when Bitcoin sort of like shot up. I forget what the price was at the time. And it was on my radar for a while. A couple years later, 2017, I bought my first Ethereum, I think for like $20, early 2017 or something like that. Just kept buying it and really bought it all year long and made a lot of money. And then I lost it all in 2018. That was my first market cycle. I was like that guy that's saying like, yeah, we're going to rebound here. I'm going to buy some more and didn't work out very well. But along that journey, I got introduced to a project called Ken. They were one of the biggest ICOs of 2017. Basically, I was like, this is cool. They built an SDK. You could build these X to earn apps with their SDK. So I reached out to them. I entered a hackathon with them. And we were like the community favorite award. We won a prize. It was like a tip bot where you could tip on social media. This was like 2019. Eventually asked them for a job. They said, we have no engineering roles here. They're all in Israel, but we have this thing called developer advocate. And I was like, what the fuck is that? But sounds cool. So long story short, I ended up taking the role and started working with them and building out like a small developer community. And then flash forward to after being there for 2 years, they went through some stuff with the SEC. It was not a very fun time. Decided to pivot and migrate to Solana. And I found out about Solana probably mid 2020. And then I was helping with the migration to Solana. And then into 2021, that's when I'll just like stop there. That's right whenever I was like, they got a rollover here. I'm going to see if I can shoot my shot. Because listening to Anatoly, it's like, this is either a giant scam or this is the next real deal thing. So luckily it was the latter.
What was interesting about what Anatoly was saying, like there was a million blockchains and you would have known that working at Kin, and everyone's saying that they're the best and they do a million things and whatever. But what stood out for you, I guess, at the time with Solana? Was it the vision, the mission, the tech?
Yeah, so Ken was on a fork of Stellar and it was really slow. So that's why they migrated, because they were actually hitting that capacity with all these apps. Just honestly, the tech was interesting. Like I didn't know a ton about smart contract development. Like I knew people were building programs on chain, but I also knew that it was slow and expensive. And then when you just listen to some of the really old, horrible quality videos of Anatoly talk about the conviction he had coming from his background, that he had actually solved the problem to take what Ethereum had done and make this actually scalable to to the world. Like that sort of stuff is what resonated with me. And into 2021, I tell this story pretty often that I started DMing Raj and Dan Albert on Twitter and like, give me a job. I see you have this role. And then finally, I basically twisted their arm into submission. And Raj called me one night at midnight and was like, what's the deal? Like, why do you want to leave where you are right now? And why do you want to come here? And then I explained to him, like, I have a lot of experience in this and I really want to help build out the developer community on Solana. And a couple days later, I had an offer. So it was an interesting story.
And it's a job you invented pretty much for yourself, right? Like they did not have this role at Solana when you were talking to, was it Raj and Anatoly or what was the discussion? It was kind of like, cool, but we don't know if this is a thing that we need or this is a thing that we need that, wow, you've now opened our eyes to it. Like, how did that discussion go?
Yeah, so they actually did have a role. The definition of it was sort of like pretty vague. I don't think they really knew what it was. I think somebody probably just had told Solana Foundation or Solana Labs that they needed a developer advocate on board. And then they definitely did, because if you looked at what was out there, it was the core docs that literally don't teach you how to do anything. They just big, wordy, massive paragraphs about this programming model. And you had to have a brain like this big to actually be able to develop on Solana in those days. And a few people were able to do it. And thankfully, guys like Armani and Daffy and some of these guys building out in the open source code, that was what allowed some of these other guys to build. But basically, Dan Albert, who's like the head of the foundation right now, was doing my role amongst another million things. And when he hired me, I was like, all right, where do you want me to start? And he was basically like, you've done this before, choose your own adventure. And that was pretty much the whole start of it. I was like, okay, let's go.
What an adventure has been so far. So, okay, you're given this new role and now it's kind of like, okay, how do you start? And back then, Solana, I mean, the state of developer docs or anything was pretty bad. I remember when we started, there was literally one tutorial, I think, and there was a Discord channel.
The Paul X escrow tutorial, the Solana Bible.
Yeah, and there was a few, I think, GitHub sort of demo projects that we used as a template for our hackathon, something like that. But that was it.
Solid was open source.
Hey, look, I was a solid believer right to the end, man. But there wasn't much, right? So why is it important to build a developer ecosystem? Maybe that's one direction to go with.
Yeah.
And how do you do that as well?
Yeah, so I just like to reference Ken because when Ken was pretty unknown and I had to spend a lot of time just going out and being like, hey, please come over here and build on this thing that you have no idea what it is, but it's cool and you can like earn some revenue doing a side project. The exact opposite problem happened on Solana. So number one, building out that developer community is like developer platforms are probably some of the most important things in the world. And like you talk about Facebook, all these different groups, solving that problem is not unique to blockchain on how to actually grow those communities because it's challenging in many different ways. But the importance of having that base, like strong developer community, it over time becomes super compounding where like once that base is there, they start to bring in new people and it just gets harder and harder. And when I say harder, I mean like it gets hardened. Like that community becomes so strong. And if you don't ever catch that sort of momentum or you don't ever get that base of really strong developer community, it'll just fizzle out. And really, the first thing, my first day at Solana Foundation, so I was at Labs at the time, and Labs is pretty much focused on the core protocol and then some products like Solana Mobile. Foundation is more on like the marketing, the business, the growth side of things, and that's where the treasury is. So they switched DevRel because it's more like evangelism and some of these things over to Foundation. But my first day, I just sat in Discord and watched. And I did this for about a month. And I started to write some example code to share with people for questions that were being asked on a regular basis. But then I realized very quickly, for Ken, I had to beg people to build. For Solana, the demand for this massive group of people that wanted to build on this new technology, it was like, people don't realize this, the demand was so high, but nobody could figure out how the hell to do it. So I sort of just made some shit up. And really what I made up was I would just watch Discord. And then I would see somebody altruistically answering questions. And I would be like, DM them like, hey, will you come in a private Discord with me? And I started to build up this sort of like 20-person group of engineers just to put them in the same room and like ask them if they would be interested to sort of help. And we started paying them just like a small little salary, like just keep doing what you're doing, write some content, help in Discord. And then they started producing content and I would share it on Twitter. And this is really what like, this is such a weird thing to say, but once I started sharing content and that people wanted, then more people would see that and want to write content. And there was this flywheel. If I do something cool in Solana, Chase or Tolly or these people will retweet it, and it just kept going and going and going. And like, that's how my account became like what it is. Back then, I was more so like not much of a shit poster. Now I try to keep it 50-50, like half educational, half just complete nonsense. But that's how you keep.
That's a pretty good ratio. Yeah, maybe you got to up the nonsense ratio though.
We have this thing that we call internally, it's like an external advocate program. That was the first version of that. And from that came the entire DevRel team that exists today. It was almost like an incubator for like devs who already had other jobs that liked Solana. But once you started writing some content, doing some support, eventually it was just like, hey, once I got approval, it was like, hey, do you want to work here? And that flywheel of hiring started happening. And then from there, it sort of just took on a life of its own. And the only thing I was there to do was to sort of just like a scout looking for anybody in those early days when we didn't have a ton of developers. We probably did have 75 devs at that point in time. We have way more than that
the
now.
Meme was just, too late.
Yeah, that was like a 2-year-old. It was 2 years too late. But I started just spending time. I answered every single DM. It came to a point where I was the only source of Solana information on social media. And my DMs, like I was in the early days before Metaplex existed, NFTs and all this docs and content and all these courses we have now, it was just my DMs. Like I'm talking like 150 plus per day. And I answered every single one of them that wasn't some sort of like scam. It's like, hey, I want to do this cool thing. What do you think? Like I answered them all. The numbers are down lower now because we have a bigger DevRel team. The information exists. We have a Stack exchange. But dude, like,
150 a day.
Yeah, it was a lot, man.
That's insane.
It was pretty wild and like hard to keep track of. And I think a lot of it had to do, I don't think this works all the time. I think it was the perfect time, the perfect technology, the right people were in place. Like Armani was there. I was out here sort of like shouting shit from the rooftops. Anatoly was there. You were there in the early days, but then you had like Max and Daffy from Mango and a lot of these guys. And then people just started seeing them and what they were building. And it was just like all the right people at all the right place at the exact right time, which was sort of like the catalyst for us to be able to attract a bunch of developers who were already in blockchain or thinking about it, but couldn't build what they wanted on some of these other pre-existing chains. So I don't think there's one thing you can pinpoint to like how we did it. It was just a lot of luck and a lot of the right people showing up at the same time. So, I can take very small amount of credit for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think this focus on developers is kind of unique to a lot of L1s out there. Like there are so many L1s which focus on users. Like that's their core metric is how do we get more users? If we're a certain blockchain starting with a P, it's let's go and pay some big mega corpo millions of dollars. And then hopefully all of the people that are drinking Starbucks one day can then go, hey, I want to use a blockchain for some reason. But there's this focus on users or focus on developers. But I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, the thesis is if we get more developers onboarded, then they're going to build stuff. And the stuff that they build is what gets the users. So actually, you are increasing the number of monthly active users in the ecosystem doing stuff. But it's a chicken and the egg problem. You need people to build the stuff for people to actually go and use, right? Is that the thesis? Or is this a core metric? Or what are the core metrics for the foundation? I guess your role certainly is focused on that developer ecosystem, but maybe just like a bigger picture, like is this an important metric that you see going forward?
Yeah, I think that was the early thesis. And I'm a huge developer maxi. Like my focus really is sort of looking at all the stuff that we're doing. Jacob Creech and some of our data team has put together some really great data infrastructure to start tracking developer activity. You can actually see on a chart when we did a thing, and if the number went up, then you start to be able to start dialing some knobs in and seeing where that works. And like that's our thesis. It's more the ground up model. Like you said, we get enough developers to build projects, playing a numbers game to an extent. Like more developers means more projects, means a higher chance of somebody hitting a really, really good project. I think over time that needs to change and we should focus a little bit more. I'll get into that a little bit later about how my mentality has sort of shifted around just straight up developers or whatever. The other model of sort of going after larger Web 2 companies, like the thesis is not bad, but the problem lands is if that company that you partner with or whatever you call it doesn't have conviction in what you're doing and they don't actually build out a Web3 team, like the second that you stop talking to them, they just go back to their normal job and it was sort of like becomes a big waste of time, So that thesis works is like if I was going to do something like that, I would require that company had spun up a Web3 sort of side. You know what I mean? Like, you want them to have some conviction around what you're doing, not just get into Web3 because it's the hot thing to do today, like the pivot to NFTs or whatever for Web2 corporations. That's not, the ground up model is what builds that sort of core sticky base. And the core metrics for me, like they told me whenever I became the head of developer ecosystem, like, you own the dev number. Basically, that is your number. And like that involves DevRels and all the stuff Jacob Creech and team are doing with improving the developer experience and onboarding and all these different things. And then hacker houses, like, all right, it's not my job. Ellie runs these hacker houses, but it's like, what's working in them? What could be better? Hackathons, Matty Tay runs those, but I work with him. We just try to like sort of just dialing, just slightly tweaking things to see what's working. And overall, it starts to paint this really broad picture. And then I'll sort of speak to what I've been thinking lately as a huge developer maxi, playing this numbers game, more devs, more devs, more devs. But like, you can bring in as many devs as you want. But if it's just all devs, and they're not really thinking about product market fit, and they're just building for more devs or building the same products over and over, you're not going to necessarily get net new users. You're just going to steal them from another project. So there needs to be some sort of like, in Web3, not just Solana in general, it's like devs are building, like they're the product guys, they're the marketers, they're the front end designers. Horrible idea. And in the real world, it's like a product guy comes in and a business guy comes in, and they're like, what's a real problem that we need to solve that's going to get actual users? And then we'll bring in the developers when we're ready to build out this MVP. And so I think in Web3, a lot of times it's actually somewhat backwards in the way that works. Because you probably know this, is like, I'm just going to throw a number out there. Maybe 1% of, or less of engineers are actually that founder type guy, you know? So you're sort of just hearing my internal dialogue of the things I've been thinking about lately on, like, you know, just numbers of devs. That's great. But at some point in time, you have to mature that and figure out how to build strong teams, or at least help facilitate that.
Well, it's kind of devs, and it's not really an end goal for growth of anything, really, because the idea is that, yes, you want devs, but if they don't build productive things that are, you know, new things and start projects and all this kind of stuff, then kind of what's the point? Like, what are people doing every day? They wake up in the morning, and how do they get paid? If they don't, then they're not going to stick around. They might appear in the Discord one day, but if it doesn't actually lead to something, and as you say,
opportunity is the carrot at the end of this. And like, what is that carrot? And it's
what is it? Like, is it a DAO, do you think? Like, or is it like the grant sort of idea where there's lots of grants for building things? Is it more VCs involved with talking to these dev teams? Is it, I don't know, something else? What's that catalyst, that opportunity, which sort of is the light that, okay, you get all these people in a room and then you show them something, and then, hey, you get 10 projects that come out of that?
Yeah, I think once you get through the sort of like onboarding, what is Solana, how do I build on it, whatever, you get to it. Like right now, it's like we push as many people as possible into Grizzlython. $600 million has been raised over the last 2 years in our major hackathons. That is a big carrot. But that's for a certain type of person, because these things are like startup competitions, not just like a hackathon where you build like some silly little fun thing. That's welcome. We love to see it. And you could get a grant for building some of these things. But these are like the biggest events in Web3. Last one had 750 submissions. That's like Google, Amazon numbers for hackathon like sort of submissions. And there's multiple sort of paths. There's like the student might get bled into an internship path early on. There's also senior students, like maybe somebody about to be graduated can get put into a job where they get hired. The student, that the 18 to 25 range is definitely the easier. They have less risk. They could take a bet and fail, and it's not a big deal. A lot of them still live with their parents, so they don't have to worry about rent in a lot of cases. So like, it's just a little bit easier in that world. Founding a company is much harder, and also trying to found a company and paying your bills at the same time. This is just like a real challenging problem to solve. The hackathons right now are that carrot. This is the big opportunity, but we need to get a little bit better. And Super Team has done an amazing job about creating this grants platform, like an Instagram, like, hey, I need you to like build this, like $5, $10, $20,000 to do a thing. So that allows you to slowly start earning your first money in Web3 until you get your idea going. But again, it's the chicken and the egg problem. Even if you were to have a successful protocol, how do you get the users? And I don't know how many net new users that we're getting in Web3. It might actually be negative right now. I don't know the answer to that. It's just like you have to look at all these things together. You can't just focus on one thing. But You focus on one really well, which we did with developers. Number two, developer ecosystem. Now it's like, how do we take those developers, parlay those guys into a full stack team of product people and marketers and really build something useful? Like for you guys have built an amazing experience on Step. Another example I would have to give is, say, Dialect. They're like product first and they've built a killer ass product, and that's how you get users.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a big problem to solve that it's not like you can sort of sit there and then just pull all the strings and then everything magically happens. It's kind of like, I tend to agree with what you've said there. Just focus on doing one thing really well and growing that developer ecosystem and having that carrot there. And I think the point about hackathons and like there's a money pot there for people that can actually quit their day job and get enough money to go and start something. And hey, if they build a really cool thing, maybe they do go down the founder path. And also something like that maybe attracts other people that are not devs, like product people or business people or whatever, that is necessary to build an actual lasting product and get new users. I think I say this often. I look at centralized exchange users of crypto as kind of like Web 2, because it pretty much is. And that market is like at least 100x over the number of people that are using Web 3. So I think that at least some of the growth from Web3, like that's a fertile ground to at least go to. But what are those people sort of using products for? That's the other question. Is that someone logging on to Binance every day to buy a coin, hoping they get rich tomorrow? Like, sure, that's one major use case. But are these people going to be using other DeFi things or NFTs or something like that? But here's a question on the growth of NFTs. People like to say Solana, like NFTs are the main thing, or at least they have been for the last 12 months. How did that growth come about? Was this premeditated? Was this a thing which just happened spontaneously? Was there sort of forethought on you guys' behalf trying to make it a thing? Because right now, Solana is like an amazing NFT ecosystem, if not like vying for number one with Ethereum on most days in terms of like active users, addresses, fees paid, number of NFTs bought per address, blah, blah, blah.
It's kind of the same story I told earlier about our sort of developer ecosystem growth. I wasn't officially onboarded at the time, but I was still closely following Solana. I don't know whose idea it was, but really Bartosz and Jordan literally just, there was like this sort of moment where CryptoPunks started to get popular again. Just all of a sudden started to see a little bit about it. It was my first, like, I was like, what the fuck is a CryptoPunk? And this was like early 2021. And then like I start to see Bartosz and Jordan towards the beginning of early 2021, Bitcoin Miami, those guys had started building out the very first version of Metaplex. There was no real indication that NFTs were going to explode. But by the time Bitcoin Miami, these guys didn't sleep for like weeks. Bitcoin Miami, in the middle of the night, they finished the Metaplex protocol and launched it. And then seemingly right after that, NFTs on ETH started to explode. And then like Solana art came with punks on like Solana punks, and like obviously we got a bunch of shit for that, and it is what it is. But that brought some attention to like, oh wait, there's NFTs on Solana. So I'm not gonna say it's all bad. Like I didn't like the clones, it is what it is. But then the Degenerate Apes, Solana Monkey, like SMBs weren't even really popular in the beginning. I bought 12. I sold them all for like 8, 9, 10, 12. I sold them all for less than 10 sold because I still didn't really understand NFTs at the time. So yes, I'm an idiot. But
I still don't.
But yeah, so I think what happened was, again, the right people started building this thing out, and they just caught the wave when that bull market exploded and NFTs got hot. Solana was just there with Metaplex and like a kind of standard for NFTs. We're still not quite there yet with the exact standard. But at the end of the day, like right place, right time, right people. And we just caught that. If Bartosz and Jordan would not have busted their asses to launch Metaplex, at the time, it was just like an internal project called Metaplex. It eventually got spun out to its own thing because it had its own sort of idea. But if they hadn't done that right then, there's a chance that we would have missed NFT 2021 bull market, and like we would be not irrelevant right now, but like that was a catalyst for people paying attention to Solana, and we probably wouldn't be the number 2 NFT ecosystem right now. And actually number 1 by some metrics, not by total dollars, but by like total volume of things like transactions or NFTs traded. I think we are number 1. I got corrected by Pedro the other day whenever I said number 2 ecosystem. He was like, not for everything.
Absolutely. And I remember when we were looking at integrating a lot of these NFT projects back in the day, and there was no standard to just get information, metadata about them, because we wanted to integrate them to STEP. People like, where's my picture of a monkey or whatever? And because there was no standard, there was no Metaplex, it was like, oh, you're telling me that there's 100 of these things launching and they're all different, and we have to go and contact everyone individually to get IDLs from everyone to figure out what the hell's going on. It's like, man, this is like DeFi times 10. Like, this is going to take a lot longer to do, right? So yeah, I'm totally glad that there is standardization. But I guess on the topic of standardization, like, there are some critical projects which have come along in the Solana ecosystem, like say Anchor, which open source projects, and they've attracted a lot of people, and they've also been a catalyst for people building new stuff. How important are these things? Like, certainly in the early days, they were very important when there was nothing. Are they still important now, or are there new things to build? Like, what is the Anchor of 2023? Is there just this area which we're lacking right now, or what's the go?
Yeah, so Anchor, obviously insanely important. Bless you, Armani, for spending your time doing this. I think I had a conversation with Armani like a long time ago about this. And I don't think that his company wanted him to even do it. And he was like, no, I don't want to write the same boilerplate code every fucking time that I build on Solana. So I'm going to build this thing. And he just built it, and it saved a lot of lives. And like, I think we have some graphics somewhere that show Anchor versus Solana programs. And that chart is still on a steady incline up, like Anchor versus Rust native programs. So super important. The question around whether Anchor is always the thing, like, it's tough to say though, like, there's a lot of smart people out there. You see like jQuery, for example, back in the day, and like, we all thought, yeah, I'm 37, I'm a crypto boomer, so like, I used to write code in jQuery. Now we have shit like React, Vue, and all. Like, eventually somebody takes a look at Anchor and is like, I like this a lot, but I think I can do Anchor on steroids or make people's lives even easier. But that's just the progression of technology. I don't think Anchor's going anywhere anytime soon. But I think another thing, infrastructure has really improved greatly. I'm pretty close with, and I talk to Mert at Helios a lot because I like what he's doing over there. And I think the indexers, like, there's other groups that are doing indexing, like, and a lot of these things. I mean, I have to shout out Hello Moon as well, who's doing some really cool stuff. People were building real tools that are making everybody not have to suffer like the early guys. The chewing glass meme was two things. It was learning how to build on Solana, and learning the whole programming model, and then learning Rust at the same time, and then learning how to like interact with all these things. That chewing glass was like a combination of things. But now with Anchor and all these sort of indexers and all these sort of like abstraction tools that are being built, the new generation's lives are becoming much easier and easier. And now we have somebody who just built, on top of Anchor, built Seahorse Lang, a Python. Like, you can literally write Python code to build smart contracts that auto-gens Rust and Anchor code for you. And it's like seeing these things from when I started and I first came in and I read the core docs and I'm like, this is all we have? So seeing the state of things now makes me extremely happy. And it also makes me super excited to know, with that trajectory that we're on, like, how much easier it will be 1 year from now.
Yeah. I guess 2023, I always sort of ask this question of what people are looking forward to, but I guess not so much what you're it could be what you're looking forward to, but also what do you think we need, or what do you think's missing? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this connection between converting these 6,000 people that have signed up to the Grizzlython, like, how do we up that numbers of people that are starting projects that are sustainable and maybe funding them, or DAOs setting up which are doing grants, or I don't know. What's your thoughts of 2023? Like, what's the big metrics to look forward to, or interesting areas that we need to be tracking? Because I think that Electric Capital report that came out, that was awesome. Like, we saw the developer growth on Solana. What was the number? Like 600% over last year or something like that? Yeah, amazing sort of stats there. So we know
2,000 active developers, which, like, obviously, you know that you can only measure.
And I was 75.
You can only measure this via open source code. Like, we have our own internal. Electric Capital has their own, like, GitHub. They have some pretty strict rules. It's like their numbers are 2,000. Ours are 2,500 internally, because to be a full-time developer, the requirement, I think, on Electric Capital is that you have to push code 10 times per month, which is kind of weird because, like, there's some developers that only push code once a month. They're full-time. They're not like pushing PRs, it's probably better to push them more early and often, but some developers will just build up a massive PR and submit that all at once. So there's a lot of questions around that. So number of developers is not as important as this other metric that I'm about to say. Developer retention in this sort of world is the most important metric. What's your retention month over month? Right now, I think our 90-day retention for developers is roughly 20, which is good by industry standards. Great is 30% as any sort of developer platform, blockchain or not. So like that's a real core metric to get to. The crazy and the other nuance here is that you don't know if you retained, like there's a chance if they dropped off, it's not that you didn't retain them, it's that they joined a closed source project. So like these numbers are never like going to be fully accurate. And also the difference between Ethereum numbers and Solana numbers is that Ethereum's probably about, because of their ethos, about 80+% open source, where Solana is probably maybe closer to 30 or 40% open source.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of the builders on Solana are Solana native, and they never inherited that old ethos of like, you know, it's just a generational thing, man. Like that wasn't in the values that were important to some of these OGs from Bitcoin that then sort of like got into Ethereum. That open source thing, we push on it. Like we ask people, we also bias towards this. Like in our hackathons, you're going to get more appreciation if your code has been open sourced, you know? And it's important if you're building code that can be composed upon, like having that closed source really staggers innovation that could happen a lot more rapidly. But I mean, at the same time, I get it. If you're building a business, just open source part of your code. If you don't want to open source your secret sauce, that's okay. Like open source some of it, share something with somebody. Like, but yeah, we just didn't inherit the ethos of that.
Yeah, I definitely think for hackathons and these sorts of things, for anyone that is part of the Grizzlython that's listening to this, it does make a difference, I think, that when you're submitting your project, you're submitting some sort of demo, maybe some sort of presentation usually, but also a code base as well. And this kind of helps so much, not only to get your submission noticed, but also for other people. Like myself, whenever there's a hackathon, I'm literally going to every single submission. I'm looking through all of the different things which they have going on. And I usually end up contacting a whole bunch of people from that and setting up discussions with Step. Maybe it's an integration, maybe it's like a further discussion or a grant or something like that, because that's just where you find people. And if you're not as open as possible, then people aren't going to find you, right? So if you are looking to make that jump to Web3, it's pretty important to do that. Are there any sort of things which people should be aware of if they are entering one of these hackathons or building something now in Solana today?
Yeah, I've been vocal about this for a long time, and people just tend to not take my advice. Like the presentation of a hackathon is more important than the code itself, because I think a lot of developers don't understand these judges only have so much time. You like need a 3 to 5 minute presentation that's nice and tight and sweet that conveys your idea across, because you could have the best product in the world, and if you spend 30 seconds on a presentation, nobody's going to know. Imagine going to Y Combinator and like building this amazing product and MVP and then going up there and just and ahhing your way through a presentation. You got to understand that the audience here, the first wall of a hackathon is the initial review of these presentations, not your code. I don't care how beautiful your code is or how shitty it is. Nobody will see it unless you can tell them and like explain to people that what you built is going to be a good thing. It's sad that not all code gets looked at, but at the end of the day, you have 750 submissions. It will take 84 years to go through all that code. The other part that I also advocate about is creating a Twitter account and getting vocal. One of the few people that actually took my advice last hackathon, which is Shek from Wordsoul Club, and he won, because people knew about him very early on. He's building a Solana publishing platform and on-chain like social Legos, and people knew about it early. So the judges are on Twitter too. They might have already had in his mind that I can't wait to see that presentation. So that visibility is important. And I get not all devs want to do it, you know, like we just want to build. That's great, but like hire somebody, put a grant on earn.superteam.fund to somebody to make your presentation for you. You don't have to do it yourself. Just get it done and get a Twitter account created.
Absolutely. Yeah. Twitter is the discussion playground for a lot of this kind of stuff. So I think it is important to be heard there. And also just to be part of that online discussion for the Solana community as well. That's pretty much where a lot of it happens. Yes, there's Discords. Yes, there's lots of grant things, but definitely get the word out. make a good presentation. There's hundreds of these things. No one's going to listen for a 20-minute thing that the video doesn't work or something like that. Make sure that the message you're trying to convey also works. So
it's like an elevator. It's like an elevator pitch times 3, maybe. There was one other thing, and like I said, I've been in Dev Maxi forever. But what I'm starting to realize is, based off of these hackathons, what we've really seen is that the success, 10% of these hackathon participants are getting funding and 600 million raised. There's something to that. But historically, like, what you do is once it's over, you ship out a tweet and say, like, good job, congratulations, have fun with the VCs. Of course, they're going to, they can reach out to me. That's sort of a joke. They can get help if they ask for it. But some of these teams that don't really understand that they can reach out to somebody, or they don't get the right connection, maybe they had a great idea, but they didn't get plugged into the right VC or have the right amount of knowledge about starting a business, and just sort of maybe get taken advantage of. Like, there's an after effect. There's an aftercare here that can be done. Whether that's an educational accelerator. This doesn't have to be like Solana Foundation. There could be a group or a DAO, and I know Grape DAO does this. They actually reach out to hackathon participants and help them try to get them to the next level. And I think that there needs to be more of that. You even see, like you said, you reach out to some of these guys. Other projects will be like, hey, we'll bring you into us. We'll teach you how to build on Solana, and we can sort of work together. There's also opportunities to hire these people that have a good idea that's not ready. There's so many opportunities for the after fact of a hackathon to get devs, take some of these projects to the next level. And I think accelerators are potentially a solid idea for somebody to think about, figuring out how to get one of those rolling.
Absolutely. And also, if you don't place or win or anything like that, just keep doing what you're doing and back yourself, because we entered the February 2020 hackathon. We didn't win, didn't even place. Don't know if anyone even looked at the submission. Who knows? But it turned out okay because we just sort of kept at it. And it's also a good discussion point to have when you talk to VCs is, hey, I've literally demonstrated that I know what I'm doing and I can build something because I entered the hackathon, I was part of it. Here's, what we released and blah, blah, blah. So it's just that presentation is important, and just that follow-up as well after it happens. So look, we're almost out of time, but thank you so much for coming on board, Chase. So where should people go to find out more? How should they get started for deving on Solana? Hit us with the links, and also go and follow Chase on Twitter.
Yeah, so Solana.com/developers is pretty much the go-to resource for now. It's the most curated, high-quality, up-to-date content. It'll have pretty much get you everywhere you need to go to get started. And also, one of the original grants that I ever gave when I was here was for Italio, who won the last hackathon with Ironforge, who originally created SolDev, which is soldev.app, like a dev content aggregator. It was a lifesaver at the time. They're about ready to... I
remember that.
They're working on it again, and they're about ready to relaunch a rebrand of it. So that's also another really great resource to get into. And by the way, we are sponsoring Consensus. I know this is historically an ETH sort of event, but they're having a Web3-a-thon right after Grizzlython. So if you enter Grizzlython and you don't win, or even if you do, let's go ahead and just keep building for 2 extra months and parlay that project into the Consensus Web3-a-thon and just dominate the shit out of that one.
Absolutely. And we also are inviting Grizzlython participants in Turkey to be at Crossroads as well next month. So look, there's lots of opportunities after the hackathon. There's more connections that you can make from that online. But look, it's been a really interesting conversation, Chase. Definitely go check out what's going on with the developer world in Solana. Go out and be heard, and follow the shit posting of this guy. It's pretty top tier. So thank you so much. All right. Have a great rest of the day, Chase. And thanks for coming on board the Next Billion podcast.
All right. Thanks for having me, George.
Cheers.